All right, we'll go ahead and get started. There are coloring pages that will be here in just a moment. So when they get here, if you would like them, I'll let you know. Just raise your hand and they'll come in. If you're visiting, we're doing the Bible classes a little bit different. We're kind of gearing what we're doing in the auditorium this morning more towards the younger people. If you consider yourself to be a younger person, and I will leave that up to you, I would like to remind you that you can actually talk. Like I think last week some of the younger people are so used to being told in the auditorium, be quiet and don't talk, that they didn't want to talk much last week. So this is your chance, right? I know you've always wanted to yell out answers in the auditorium. Now you can, right? Unless your parents tell you no. Otherwise, Cooper, you've got permission to talk, right? Okay, Deborah, you can talk now. You don't have to be quiet the whole time. So if you've got your Bible, turn over to Judges chapter 2. Now, periodically, I will ask important questions that hopefully we can have some really good involvement with. For example, if a pirate and a ninja were to get into a fight, who would win? A ninja? You're not my son. A pirate, obviously. Gunpowder, boats, pirates. Totally. Okay, so in Judges, the reason why we're asking questions like that is because this is the book that convinced me that the Bible is not a children's book. So obviously, it's what we're going to do in a class geared toward children. And what we're seeing in Judges is an interesting picture of how Israel became just another nation. God has gone into Egypt, and what happened in Egypt? We've read about it not too long ago in the story of the Bible. What happened? Do you have the pictures? What? Okay, go get them. And Zane is going to pass out the pictures if you would like them. All right. What happened with Egypt and Israel? Who knows? Cooper, yeah. The Philistines? They're coming up. The Philistines will be in just a little bit. There was a really mean guy. What was his name? Starts with a P, ends with a harrow. Pharaoh, yeah. And what did he do to the Israelites? He made them be slaves because he saw how many there were and he was afraid. And he said, these people are going to fight and they're going to take over Egypt. Now, they didn't want to take over Egypt. They just wanted to go home. And if they had just talked about things like adults and reasoned through it, actually, if they had talked about things like children and reasoned through it, they probably would have wound up at home. But they handled it like adults and fought. So what we've got is the Israelites, God goes and takes them and brings them out of Egypt through 10 what? There are 10 mighty plagues, signs, wonders, whatever word you want to use that means amazing thing. If you're an Egyptian, they were plagues. If you're Israelites, they're miracles or signs or wonders. And he brings them out and he cuts something in half, a really big wet something. What does he cut in half? Landon? The Red Sea. Yeah, we normally don't talk about cutting seas in half, but I'm not God. I can cut cheese in half, even a really big wheel of cheese, but there's no way I could ever cut an ocean in half or a sea. What is the difference between a sea and an ocean? Ask your parents. And so God cuts the Red Sea in half. He brings them through the water. Paul will later say that they were baptized into Moses when they crossed the Red Sea. So that's a really cool picture. He brings them to Mount Sinai, and God comes down on the mountain and is talking to Moses. And what do the Israelites do while God is on the mountain talking to Moses? They build something. What do they make? Anybody remember? A big golden thing? You're right. We'll take it. Yes. A calf, a golden calf. They start to worship an idol while they can see God on the mountain with Moses. And the mountain is shaking and they hear thunder and all sorts of things. And they build a calf and they begin to worship it and they call the calf God. Well, God's not happy and he warns them, don't ever do this again. And then he eventually takes them into the promised land and he drives out some of the other nations. And that's where our story picks up now. Moses has died. Joshua has died. And now we see Israel in the promised land dealing with all of the people that they didn't deal with before. So just at the outset, at the book of Judges, if something is a problem, should you wait to deal with it, or should you deal with it now? For example, if your car is making a funny noise, should you wait to deal with it until you're driving on the highway, or maybe should you take it to the mechanic ahead of time? What do you think? Yeah, Greg. Take it to the mechanic, yeah. If your foot hurts, should you go ahead and start running that marathon, or maybe, I don't know, go see the doctor first, right? And so if something is a problem, deal with it now. What happens if you don't deal with problems now? Do they tend to get better or worse? Worse, yes. If your brother says something mean to you, should you just go to your room and get angry about it, or should you go and talk to your brother and say, that hurt my feelings? Adelaide, what should you do? Well, you don't know, right? Because your brothers never do that, right? So what we should do is deal with the problem now. God told Israel, he brings them across the Red Sea, and there are all these other people living in the land. And God says, you need to get those people out of the land, because if you don't, they're going to cause trouble. So guess what Israel does? Yes. They don't get them out of the land. They would like to drive down the highway with their car making funny noises, right? They don't want to deal with the problem now because it seems like it's difficult. Here's a cool life lesson. It will always be difficult. It's just going to get more difficult later if you don't deal with it now, right? Life is not easy. When people sinned and sin came into the world, life got difficult. Right, when Adam and Eve were in the garden, food just grew on trees. I mean, it kind of still does, but it just grew on the tree. It was there. They could just grab it. And now that sin came, they have to go and they have to work the ground. By the sweat of your brow, you will eat. So life got difficult. Life is always difficult. By not doing what you ought to do, you just make it more difficult. So would it have been easy or hard for Israel to be faithful to God? Would it be something they had to work on every day, or would it just happen naturally? They'd still have to work on it, right? But they didn't drive the nations out, so it just got more difficult. And that's the story of Judges. So you get to Judges, and let's look in chapter 1. Now what you're going to see in chapter 1 is a few people did the right thing. You have Caleb and his family, and they start pushing people out in the beginning of chapter 1. You can see that in like verse 8. It says in the beginning of chapter 1 there. And so you've got these people who are pushing people out, and they're doing a pretty good job, but then the rest don't. Look in verse 21. At the same time, the Benjaminites did not drive out the Jebusites who were living in Jerusalem. The Jebusites lived among the Benjaminites in Jerusalem even to this day. Then you have the house of Joseph, and then you have Manasseh, and you have Ephraim, and you have all these people just going down this list who are not doing what they're supposed to be doing, and that's going to lead to problems. And that gets you to chapter 2. God is going to say, you didn't do what I wanted you to do, so now you're going to have all sorts of problems. The people then are going to start worshiping other gods, and it's just going to go from bad to worse. What did God promise Israel would happen? If they walked into the land and they did what he said, what would happen? Yeah. They would get really good stuff. Yes. In fact, he told them that every place where you walk, I will give you. I will give you houses that you didn't build. I will give you crops that you didn't plant. How cool would that be? How neat would it be if you just walked into a new city and somebody just gave you a house? Right? I thought that might happen when we came to Tennessee. Like we would just cross the border and somebody in Nashville would go, here's a house. It doesn't work that way, right? But it would have worked that way for them. If they had just crossed the river and listened to God, every place they walked, God would have given it to you. What if I told you every place you walked for the next week would become your property? What would you do? Yeah. Yes, I like the way you think. In particular, you should walk like along Manhattan and Broadway and places like that. Yes, right? So, yeah, you would walk everywhere. You would find the best property and you would walk all over it. So God tells Israel, everywhere you walk, I'm going to give to you. Guess what Israel does? I think I'm done. Right? That was not smart. They should have kept walking. They should have kept going. But they stop, and because they stop, all the people are still around them. There's all these false gods. There's all these difficult things that are going to happen to them. And listen to what it says in chapter 2 and verse 20. The Lord's anger burned against Israel. Is that good or bad? Bad. Yes. Right. I like that. That's bad. You do not want God's anger burning against you. And he said, you violated my covenant. Does that sound good or bad? Bad. Right? You did not do what I asked you to do. So I'm not going to drive out the other people. I'm not going to give you the land. You did not walk in the way that I told you. And so the Lord left the people and didn't drive them out, and he didn't give them over to the Israelites. So then the rest of the story of Judges is a terrible story. Right? And we like to think of the Bible as a nice, happy book. Now the ending is really nice. But there are parts in the middle where it's kind of touch and go. And this is one of those places. And this is a book that when you're little, if you have a children's book and there are some stories that we're going to talk about, that's fine. But as you get better at reading, this is a book that you should not read without your parents. So I want everybody who is under the age of 45 to raise your hand right now and say, I will never read the book of Judges without my parents. Thank you. That's really important. Okay, so Judges chapter 3. We're going to look at our first judge. So what will happen is Israel will not listen to God and things will go very badly for them. People will come and take all their stuff. They'll beat them up. They'll steal their donkeys. And then Israel will cry out to God and say, we're sorry we messed up. And then God will send somebody to save them. Some people in the past have actually called the book of Judges the book of saviors. Now we tend not to say it that way because when we say the word savior, who do we think of? God, yeah, or Jesus. So if Jesus and God and the Spirit are our saviors, if they're the ones who save us, and this is a book of saviors, who do you think these judges are going to show us? Who do you think they're going to look like? Yes. Jesus. Yeah, they're going to show us Jesus. So when you read through the Judges, there's going to be little things about each one of them that should make you go, that sounds a little bit like Jesus. Even if all that it is that they saved God's people. Because that's kind of what Jesus does. He comes and he saves God's people. But there are some really neat things, really cool connections that happen between the Judges and between Jesus. And now each one of the Judges is a person like you and me. They're not perfect. They make mistakes. Sometimes they do things they shouldn't. Sometimes they do really great things. Sometimes they do really bad things. They're just people. What makes them judges? What is it that makes them somebody who is special? There's an F word that goes all throughout the Bible, and it's really important. Yes, faith. Their faith in God. They will turn to God, and God will empower them, or God will use them, and he will be with them. It is their faith in God. So when you think about, well, what can I do? Right? I don't know that I will ever be like one of the judges. I don't know that I will ever deliver a nation of people. I don't know that I will ever be like Shamgar and beat up 600 people with a sharp stick. That's kind of a hint as to who my favorite judge is. I just don't know if anything like that will ever happen. But I can be faithful, and God will work with me through my faith to do whatever it is that God wants to do. See, when we read through the stories, we kind of think that, oh yeah, they knew. Like our first judge, Othniel. Othniel knew that if he stood up, he was going to win. But you see, the thing is, he didn't know that. He didn't know. He didn't know how the story was going to end. He just trusted that God would do what God said God was going to do. And then he goes out and he trusts whatever it is that God tells him. So Othniel is our first judge. He's going to come and he's related to Caleb. He's going to go and he's going to fight and he's going to drive out the people who had come and oppressed Israel. Now this is what you would expect. If you were a judge, what would you do? You would raise an army, you would go and you would fight, and there would be a big battle, there would be flags and trumpets and music, and everybody would be happy, and afterwards there would be a giant party, and you would maybe have a painting made of you fighting. right? That's what you do if you're a judge or a general or something like that. Let's look at the next one. His name is Ehud. Say that. Ehud. Yeah, if you're not going, you're not saying it right. Ehud. Hebrew names are fun to say, right? So Ehud. So he comes when Israel is again being oppressed, right? So somebody came, things were bad, then things got better, and the people forget. Have you ever gotten in trouble for the same thing twice? Yes? Maybe your parents said, don't throw macaroni at the table, and for like a week you didn't, but eventually what happens again? Not my children. Right? Yeah, you forget, right? I mean, we just do. We forget, and then we make the mistake, and then somebody has to remind us again. Adults do the same thing. Have you ever noticed those big white signs when you're driving down the road and they have numbers on them that say like 35 or 55, and they have speed limits? Have you ever wondered why there are so many of those white signs on the road? You want to know why? Because adults forget. They forget that I'm supposed to be driving 30 miles an hour, so they have those nice white signs and blue flashy lights to remind them that they're only supposed to be going 30 miles an hour. And so the same thing is true with us. The same thing is true with Israel. They forget. And so another group of people is going to come, and they're going to be called the Moabites. And they're going to come, and they're going to beat up Israel, and they're going to take all their stuff. In fact, they take a city that is really important to the Israelites called Jericho. What's the first place that Israel attacked when they crossed the river into the Promised Land? Greg? Jericho. So if you were an Israelite, that's kind of a big deal, right? This is like the symbol of you coming into the Promised Land. It's what you would look to and say, yeah, God gave us this land because he tore down the walls of Jericho and he gave them to us. And so now if you're not obeying God, and a bad group of people comes and they took Jericho, maybe that might remind you that, oh, we're not acting like God's people. We're acting like the Canaanites. Like all those tribes that were supposed to be driven out. We're behaving just like them. So now somebody else has come and they took Jericho away from us. Would that remind you maybe that, hey, we should act like Joshua? We should act like the people when they crossed the river and they listened to God. So there's this guy named Ehud, and he is going to come and he is going to tell the king a very important message, right? He says, King Eglon, I have a secret message for you. So if you ever happen to be a dictator and somebody comes and says they have a secret message for you, the correct response is no. Right? So let's practice. I have a secret message for you. No, good. Okay, well, Eglon, for whatever reason, says yes. And so Ehud comes, and they have a little talk, and when they're done, Eglon doesn't want to be king anymore. And then Ehud sneaks away, and then they have a big party. Where are the armies? There's no army. Where's the giant battle? And the flags? Right, where are the trumpets? There's none of those things. Why? We're being shown something. God doesn't save you in the way that you would expect to be saved. Right? If I was going to deliver a nation of people, I would raise up a great general, I would give him a huge army, a really big tank, and a cool theme song. And that's what we would do. We would roll into the enemy land, we would bomb them and blow everything up, we would have trumpets, there would be flags. The flags are the most important thing. And then after the end, there would be a big party. But that's not what happens in this story. In this story, you have Ehud, a left-handed Benjaminite, which is really interesting. Raise your hand if you're left-handed. Are you really left-handed? Are there really two left-handed people in the Fisher family? Just one? One? Okay. Notice how many people raise their hand. Now really, if you're left-handed, put it up high so we can see. There are three people in the Fisher family, or two? Two, 4, 5 people. Now look around the auditorium. Look at how many people are in here. 5 people are left-handed. Is that common? Nope, it's not that often that you wind up with left-handed people. Now the cool thing about being a Benjaminite is Benjamin means the son of my right hand. So you have a left-handed son of the right hand. Wait a minute. That's not normal, right? And that's what you're supposed to see. You have this left-handed son of the right hand. So not only, normally, you don't find that many left-handed people. Most people are right-handed. Now, if you're left-handed, I would recommend many of you maybe try to become professional pitchers, right? That's good if you're left-handed. Otherwise, really, what's the difference between left-handed and right-handed other than the scissors never fit and they don't quite know how to teach you to write? But other than that, it doesn't matter too much normally, except here you have a left-handed son of the right hand. Why? If you were from Benjamin, don't you think you'd be right-handed? If you were going to raise up a general from the son of the right hand, wouldn't it be like the biggest right-handed person you could find? So Ehud is not who you expect. And he doesn't come to save you the way that you would expect. He does it in a back room with a secret message all by himself. And now when you go to Jesus in the New Testament, Jesus comes as a king. When you hear a king, what are things that you expect to see? If you were going to draw a picture of a king, what would you put in your picture? Adelaide? A crown? What was that? A queen. I like the way you think. Yes. A palace? Yes. Lillian? A cape? You have to have a cape. If you're a superhero or a king, you have to have a cape. All right, maybe like some horses, an army, trumpets, flags. Right? Nobody said that's maybe a cape. Right? Flags, like lots of flags. Every king in history has had flags. And so you would have all these regal things like jewels, power, maybe like a giant map showing all the territory that you own. That's what you think of when you hear the word king. Do you think of somebody who wears like burlap? Have you ever worn burlap? Really, really rough clothing? Maybe somebody who doesn't have shoes, or maybe just one pair of shoes. Maybe somebody who just has one set of clothes. How many of you have more than one set of clothes? Yeah, everybody. You probably have lots of clothes. Chances are that Jesus had one set of clothes. Maybe two, probably one. He was very poor. And his clothes were probably brown. Like when we see pictures of Jesus, what do we always make his clothes? They're always white or purple or some nice fancy color. They were probably brown, like dirt brown. And they probably had holes and patches. He probably had one pair of shoes. And he was probably very, very skinny. Why? Yeah. Because he was poor. And he didn't have a lot of food to eat. And in the ancient world, if you were poor, you were very, very skinny. Because you lived based off of what you ate that day. Does this sound like a king? Yeah, if you went into a king's house, would you expect the floor to be dirt? Nope. Would you expect him to live in the bad part of town? You know, funny thing about Jesus, the place where he was from, people said that it was worthless. How would you feel if people walked into your house or in the place where you were from and they're like, wow, this is worthless? How would you feel? Sad, yeah. But yes, big thumbs, maybe 2 thumbs down for that. But that's what Jesus' life was like. It doesn't sound like a king at all, does it? Now, when a king comes and a king wins a great victory, do you picture him being defeated, or do you picture him being the one blowing the trumpet and planting the flag in the ground? Yeah, like the flag, right? But when Jesus won his great victory, it was on a hill, but he did it on a cross. And the crown that he wore, Cooper, was a crown of thorns. Does this sound like a great victory? Does this sound like a glorious king? So when you think of Ehud and you're looking at all the ways that this isn't supposed to happen, it's totally backwards. That's Jesus. God isn't going to save you the way that humans would save you. What happens with the story of Ehud when you read through that, the left-handed son of the right hand, that should make you go, this isn't right. And when you look at all the details of the rest of that story, none of it is right. It's backwards. And that's what we see in Jesus. And so when God comes to send a Savior, the Savior is not going to be like what people expect. Okay, Shamgar, my favorite judge. How many of you have a favorite judge? Yeah? Who's your favorite? Shamgar, I'm glad. Yes. You like who? God. All right, you win. Cooper. Jesus? Okay, you guys tie. You guys beat me. Shamgar is my favorite. There's one verse about Shamgar in the Old Testament here in Judges. After Ehud, Shamgar, the son of Anath, became judge, and he delivered Israel, striking down 600 Philistines with a stick. Why do you think Shamgar is my favorite? Yes. Because what? Yeah, because he beat 600 people with a stick. And when we're talking about 600 people, we're not talking about like 600 sleeping people, because that wouldn't be very impressive. These are Philistine warriors, right? So what we're seeing, or they're going to be warriors of the Philistines. Who said Philistines earlier? Was that you? No, who said? Yes, here's the Philistines, right? So Shamgar comes, and we're going to see them again when we get to Samson, and he takes a stick and he beats soldiers with a stick. Now, what should this tell you about God? Now, when God came to Shamgar and said, Shamgar, I want you to deliver Israel, and Shamgar looks around and all he's got is a sharp stick, what do you think he would have said? Would you make an excuse? Would you say, all I've got, God, all I have is a stick. I can't fight. What do you think God would have said to Shamgar? Goodbye? He's just going to give up on him? When David went to go fight a giant Philistine, what did David bring? A sling and 5 stones. In fact, when he decided to go fight the giant, he didn't even have the stones yet. All he had was a sling. And so Shamgar, when God comes to him and says, I want you to save my people, and Shamgar has a stick, Shamgar says, okay. Why would he say yes? Why would he say yes, Adelaide? Because he had faith in God. Yes, he trusted that whatever he had would be enough to do whatever God called him to do. There will be times in your life where we want to make excuses. Maybe you're going and you're going to be talking to friends, and you know that you should be telling them about God, and you're like, I can't, I don't know what to say. Do you know how to read? If you do, then you, at the very least, could you not read to them? Right? So what we find is that there's really no excuses. Moses tried to make excuses. God sent him, and Moses said, I'm really not a good speaker. And God said, don't worry, I'll talk for you. And then Moses said, well, they won't believe me. So God said, don't worry, I'll give you signs. And then Moses said, I just don't want to go. And God said, too bad. Right? So here's Shamgar. God says, go save my people. So Shamgar picks up his stick, and he goes. And who wins? Yes, Shamgar. David said, God does not deliver with the sword and the spear. Right? He delivers through the faith of his people. So here's what we see. This is what's going on. The next thing we're going to see is Deborah. Deborah is cool, and Barak is not. Right? So here's one of the interesting things. If you see a timeline with the judges, whose face gets put on the timeline? Deborah's or Barak's? Deborah's like mine, right? Mine, my face. Yeah. In fact, Deborah, this is who you're named after, is this person in the Bible. The cool thing about this, or the interesting thing, is that when you go and you look in the list of judges that show up in the text, when you go and look in the list of judges, Deborah is not listed. In 1 Samuel chapter 12 and verse 11, Barak is listed as the judge. Then how come when we make a list of judges, we put Deborah in it? I'm glad you asked. That's what the story is about. So when you start going through here, here's another thing that you should not expect. Up to this point, all of the judges have been what? Boys or girls? Boys. Ninjas or pirates? They've all been pirates up to now because ninjas are losers. And so when you get here, Deborah shows up, and this should make you go, huh. Look at verse 4 in chapter 4. So Judges chapter 4 and verse 4. Deborah, a prophetess and the wife of Lapidoth, was judging Israel at that time. She was sitting under a palm tree between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim, and the Israelites would go up to her to settle disputes. That doesn't sound very savior-ish. What's going on? Well, what's going on is that there is this guy named Barak, and Israel is being oppressed, and Barak was called by God. Look, you can see Deborah in verse 6. Hasn't the Lord, the God of Israel, commanded you, go and deploy the troops and take 10,000 men, and go, I will give Sisera, the commander of Jabin's army into your hand. But Barak didn't want to. Apparently, he didn't have a sharp stick. And so he didn't go fight. Instead, he comes to Deborah and says, I want you to come with me. And Deborah says, I will go with you, but if I do, you will receive no honor. Your honor will be given to a woman. And so now when we look back and we think about who is the judge here, I think the writer here putting this book together, God telling us this story, tells us Deborah is sitting under a tree judging, and the word judging there just means to make decisions. She is sitting there making decisions, and the reason why we're told that is because you're supposed to get to this story and go, huh. So God wants you to make that noise a lot. So let's practice. Huh. Right, when you read through the Old Testament, there's lots of things that should make you go, that doesn't seem right. And this is one of those reasons. Here is Barak. He's probably a great warrior. He's got all these soldiers, and he comes to Deborah and he says, I don't want to fight. And Deborah says, but you have to go fight. And he says, no, I don't want to. You come with me. She says, fine, I'll come, but you're not going to get any glory. You're not going to get any honor. Last week, when Mordecai talked to Esther, and he said, Esther, maybe you're going to save the people. And Esther said, I don't know if I want to. Does anybody remember what Mordecai said? Yes. Basically, yeah, you're going to. If you don't save God's people, is God just going to give up? No, what will he do? He'll send somebody else. Right, that's what Mordecai says. Esther, if you don't do this, God will deliver Israel in some other way. And so here is Barak, probably supposed to be the judge. That's what 1 Samuel 12 says. And here he shows up, and he doesn't want to do it. And so God delivers Israel some other way. And so they go out and fight. Deborah goes out with them, and they're going to go fight. And there's this giant battle between Sisera and Barak and the soldiers win. And Sisera runs away. Now, Sisera's name means one arrayed in armor. It's a pretty cool name. How would you like your nickname to be? Tank? Right? That's kind of what his nickname is, Tank. Now, we don't normally call him that, but maybe now when you read the Judges, you can see Barak fighting Tank. Would you like to fight a guy named Tank? No, they probably call him that for a reason. And so now, Barak wins, right? The Israelites win, and Tank runs away, and he goes off to this tent, and he comes in to somebody that he thinks is a friend, and her name is Jael. Not Jail, close. Jael. Jael. I don't know. You guys can practice saying that. Anyway, he comes, and he's like, can I stay in your tent? And what does she say? Yes, come in, lay down, have milk and honey. And here's another lesson. If you're ever wandering through the wilderness and you happen upon a tent and somebody says, come in and have milk and honey, what do you say? No. No. I have a secret message for you. Let's practice. What do you say? No. Here's milk and honey. Would you like some? No. Right? Especially if afterwards they say, come, lay down. I have blankets. Right? The answer is no. Right? But Sisera didn't know that, and Tank is silly. And so he goes and he lays down, and Jael crushes his head. We'll leave it there. Can you think of another person or thing that will have their head crushed? Think for just a second. Think. Yes. The snake in the beginning will have his head crushed. Yes. And the child of who, the man or the woman, will crush his head? Yes. The woman. Landon, you agree? Child of the woman? Adelaide? Fisher children? Everybody agree? Yes. The child of the woman will crush the head of the serpent. And so here what you see is you see Barak driving away Tank. Tank runs to Jael's tent and she crushes his head. You're supposed to think back to the very beginning of the Bible and go, that sounds an awful lot like Genesis 3, where the child of the woman is going to crush the head. And salvation comes through the woman. Right? So here, that's kind of a picture. You're being shown what is going to happen. There's going to be a really powerful enemy, an enemy that seems like he can't be stopped. In fact, we could even call him Tank. And how tanks just like run over buildings, that's how strong this enemy is. But a woman is going to have a child, and the child is going to crush the head of this indefeatable or undefeatable? Really strong enemy. That's what's going to happen. And so when you get to this story, that's the point. God is going to save his people, even if the people don't want to be saved. He is going to bring about his plan, no matter how hard they fight against it. You can't stop it from coming, even if it means Tank will be defeated by Jael in a tent with milk and honey. Not at all what you would think. And so now when this story gets told, who gets the honor? Deborah and Jael? Or Barak? Greg? Yeah, the women, right? And so here's another thing to remember. When you're reading through the Bible and you get to a story and there are women in the story, it happens quite a bit, but when there are women in the story, pay very close attention to the women. Right? That's really important. We tend not to do that. Right? We tend to read through and we tend to focus on the kings and the mighty warriors like the next one we're going to look at named Samson. We tend to think about those people. But when you're reading through stories and you come upon a woman who does something in the Bible, pay really close attention because God is trying to tell you something important. So last one. Let's look over at a guy named Samson. Okay, so Samson's parents were trying for a really long time to have a baby, and they couldn't. And his father's name is... Anybody know his father's name? It's really cool. Sounds like Noah. Yep. Boa? Good guess. Manoah. What is his mother's name? What is Samson's mother's name? Yep. Boa. No. I don't know. No idea. We're not told her name. Now here's a woman who does something really cool. She has a baby. The baby's going to deliver Israel. It's going to crush a lot of heads. But we're not told her name. Interesting. So think about that. Why? Maybe why? Why? Anyway, so you get to chapter 13. Samson is born, and his parents are told that Samson will be a special baby from his birth. And because he's a special baby, his mom has to do certain things. She can't eat grapes. She can't touch dead bodies. There's all sorts of things that she can't do. And then when the baby comes, Samson starts growing his hair really long. And his dad talks to him several times. Young men don't wear their hair like this, but Samson is going to... No, I'm just kidding. Samson grows his hair out because... The thing that makes him special, it's called a Nazirite vow, he can't cut his hair. He is a Nazirite from birth. Sometimes there are interesting things in the Bible, and this is one of those interesting things. Can't eat grapes, can't touch dead bodies, can't cut your hair. And so in the course of this story, how many of those rules do you think Samson is going to break? Yep. All of them. Every single one. In fact, he makes up rules and then breaks those. And so Samson is not a really good rule follower. He's going to break a lot of rules. Interestingly enough, in Samson's life, you can see pictures of Jesus. And it has taken me a really long time to get to the point where I can read Samson's story and go, oh yeah, that looks like Jesus. In fact, it feels weird saying that. But when you read the story, you can see Jesus. How? Well, what you have to do is you have to look kind of at the way that other people are treating Samson. And once you kind of look at how Samson is treated or the elements of his life, you can start to see Jesus. Was Jesus a really special baby? Yes. Was Jesus a special baby from before his birth? Yes. In fact, when Mary goes to see her cousin Elizabeth, and Elizabeth has John in her belly, what does Elizabeth's baby do? It jumps for joy. Why? because Mary and Jesus have come into his presence. And John apparently is a special baby from before he's born too. Right? So what we see here is there is a really special baby. In this story, it's Samson. Jesus is a very special baby. Samson is going to speak riddles to the people. So look at this. If I walked up to you and I said, out of the eater came something to eat, and out of the strong came something sweet, would you have any idea what I was talking about if you didn't know the story? Yeah? Or how about this? Life without breath, cold as death, all in male, never clinking, ever thirsty, never drinking. How about that? Tolkien fans know exactly what I'm talking about. Right? That's a fish. And so Samson comes and he gives them this riddle. Out of the eater came something to eat, and out of the strong came something sweet. Well, he killed a lion, and later he came back, and there was a honeybees in the lion, and he ate the honey. Right? There's all sorts of weird things wrong with that when you consider his vow. But he's speaking to them in riddles. Can you think of somebody else in the Bible who maybe spoke in parables because he didn't want people to understand what he was saying? Jesus. Jesus did that. Samson is going to be betrayed. And when he is betrayed, the people who betray him get judged. That's going to happen when he sets their fields on fire and he does all sorts of interesting things to the Philistines. Samson is going to be betrayed by a woman that he loves. What's her name? Delilah. Yes, there are two very beautiful names in the Bible. They get ruined by the women who have them. Delilah is one and Jezebel is the other. Those are both beautiful names. But when's the last time you met a friend named Jezebel? Never. I've thought about bringing the name back. My wife won't let me. So what you've got is you have this interesting situation where Samson is really in love with this woman, and she lies to him, she cheats him, she sells him out. Think about Jesus. Jesus came to save the people, Israel. He was a prophet sent to the lost sheep of the people, Israel. How did they treat him? What did they do? They lied to him, they lied about him, they betrayed him, and they sold him for 30 pieces of silver. You see Jesus being betrayed in the same image where you see Samson being betrayed by the woman that he loved. And so there are these parallels between Samson's life and Jesus' life. And the last thing, when we're reading through here, is sometimes we think that you have to be famous or from a particular family in order to serve God. Do you think that you would be really special if Moses was your grandpa? I mean, wouldn't that be cool to be like living in ancient Israel and people go, "Who is your grandpa?" Well, Ezekiel, before there was Ezekiel. Who's your grandfather? Well, Ralph. Who's your grandpa? My grandpa's Moses. Oh. Right? People might treat you differently. There is a story in Judges, in fact it's in Judges chapter 18, about Moses' grandson. So this is just to let you know that you don't have to be famous, you don't have to be rich, and you don't have to be from an important family in order to serve God. What do you have to be? Don't answer yet. So here's Moses' grandson. The Danites are going to set up an idol, and they are going to worship the idol, and they are going to take Jonathan, the son of Gershon, the son of Moses, Moses' grandson, and they're going to make him the priest of this idol. So Moses' grandson is worshiping what? He's worshiping God? Moses' grandson is worshiping idols. Wouldn't you think that anybody in all of the time of the judges, if there was one person who would be faithful, wouldn't you think it might be the grandson of Moses? But not him. So it's not about how wealthy you are, it's not about how rich you are, and it's not about coming from the right family. None of those things matter. What matters when it comes to serving God? Yeah. Trust and love, Cooper? Patience? Yes. Trust, love, patience, faith. Faith. All right, guys, thank you. That's the book of Judges, very shortly and highly edited. Love you guys. Thank you so much.